my slide up here for you. We have this, I love this picture of Wasan. It shows her beautiful eyes, and then I get some of the mountains in the back. I'm always jealous with her pictures on Facebook of all of her mountains. But again, welcome. We are getting ready to have a morning presentation with Wasan. And she will be speaking with us this morning about practice resistance. And so what we'll do initially is start our Dharma verse, and I will share the slide, and we will allow Sensei Sesshin is going to ring the bell for us.
The unsurpassed, profound, and wondrous Dharma is rarely met with even in 100,000 million kalpas. Now we can see and hear it, accept and maintain it. May we unfold the meaning of the Tathagata's truth.
All right, so now we will throw the proverbial virtual ball over to Wasan. And Wasan, again, you just let me know when you have a Q&A, and we can go, back and forth, however you want to work it. We're here to support you. So thank you so much. Let's welcome Wasan with Gasho, and get prepared for her talk.
Thank you, Fusatsu. It's a little bit hilarious, this title that I've chosen. Let me see if I can get back to it. Okay, so I've heard resistance come out of just about everybody who has unmuted themselves. They've used that word in the last 2 days, so I figure this word is going to work for me. When I was trying to find a title, I could not find a title that didn't sound like it didn't sound like what I wanted to say. So Zenku said, look, just call it practice resistance. I said, okay. I took it, and I wasn't fond of the word resistance, and I even looked it up, and it's the refusal to accept or comply with something. More specifically, the attempt to prevent something by argument or action. So, okay, I could go with that. But several months ago, something started to click with me with this word that I don't like. Several months ago in Dharma Cloud study, Teshin Sensei actually gave us an exercise, and he asked us to look during the next week to see if we could watch and see when we met with resistance. So, that word took on a different meaning, I think. From the definition in the dictionary, it seems like something that's going to come that we have to protect ourselves from. In the outside, like bear-proof garbage can, or an earthquake-resistant house, or even a vaccination. But looking through the lens of this exercise, which I still do because it's very helpful, this argument, this resistance ends up being very personal, and it's about me, and it's with me, and it was very different. So I was okay with that word of resistance. And as I looked for this resistance, the door of monkey mind just swung wide open. So what I'm going to do is just give you a very personalized, customized, but still highly conceptualized roadmap of what I've found along the way. Looks like most of us here have spent years, learning to recognize these internal dialogues that we have in our mind, and we call it monkey mind. So during Zazen, we learn to recognize the presence of monkey mind. We say, okay, we recognize the chitter chatter, and if we're lucky, we let it go, and we can continue with our Zazen or our daily practice. Resistance, however, I think it is a harder thing to pinpoint than the chatter of a busy mind. It seems to be more instinctual, kind of like an older, trickier relative of monkey mind. It's when I was looking for resistance, it's kind of like shining an ultraviolet light, to see germs or something on door handles, and it was just everywhere. So I knew I had to dig deeper. Since it was everywhere, it didn't mean that much to me. So when I first dug a little deeper, I could tell that resistance was more of a feeling than something that appeared. It was a tightening in my gut. It was a very brief sensation, and before I knew it, the chatter of monkey mind had already started. So, this is where I find myself. I know I have to go to the cushion to do my practice, but I end up reading a book, or I have some reading to do, and I end up eating a plate of cookies. So as you can tell, this can get in the way of some stuff. So looking for this resistance kind of became an on-the-go body scan. So throughout the day, I could feel myself going for the cookies or whatever, and I could feel the tightening. So that really that really helped. I think monkey mind and the beginnings of this resistance are kind of like the effects and the symptoms of the samsaric condition that we find ourselves in. And as we know, they arise and they flourish as aversion and attachment. And they're on our basic ground of ignorance. That's kind of a mouthful, kind of hard to swallow. So this title also contains the word practice. And I think we all kind of have our ideas about it, but I looked it up just for the fun of it. As a noun, it's the application of doing something instead of theories related to whatever it is. As a verb, it is ourselves carrying out or performing something, a method or an activity, but we use habit and regularity. So, like I said, this is my own roadmap. I've decided that aversion and attachment might be the main force behind most of our habitual tendencies. They're carried out, they're reinforced, they're solidified, and they're practiced. And we've been doing this since the moment we were born, I think. As babies, we cry when we want something, and we cry when we don't want something. And I think we find out really fast that it works. So as we get older, our methods get a little bit more complex because we're trying to function in society. We're trying to get along with our friends and our family and school and jobs, but we're carrying around with us in our pocket things like hate and jealousy and love and, everything you can think of. So it gets pretty complex with all that stuff carrying around. So before we even knew that we were practicing in our lives, I think everything has been polished and fine-tuned, and we're pushed out the door ready to go live our lives. So I feel like I get pushed around by my habitual tendencies. And I think that's a very polite way of saying that we spend our life trying to feed these delicious offerings to kind of satiate our attachment. And we're really good at devising sophisticated tools that camouflage and soften the edges of our suffering that was caused by aversion. We're really good at it, and it works for a while. And I found that it goes away, but I still keep trying. Even though in my head I know it's probably not gonna work, I just keep trying. And I think that's why we find ourselves in the state of suffering. So that's, and by we, I mean I, this happens to me. Maybe it happens to you. So although the title is practice resistance. It turns out that I practice resistance. I've been talking kind of about the mundane aspect of practice, you know, the things we do in our life over and over, and even, you know, things that I think everybody here probably knows how to get to the cushion, even if you don't want to. So you don't have to spend a lot of time with that. But the uncommon side of practice resistance comes probably when we are on the cushion. And fortunately, we've all kind of bumped into the Buddhist path, and it gives us our Zazen practice. So by now, we kind of have monkey under control for the most part. But while we're sitting, I think we find that we're like a ball of yarn. When you're knitting, no matter what happens, you're eventually going to get a big wadded up mess of yarn. It's very tangled, just like our habits. So we're trying to learn how to loosen those really, really tight habits. And if that occurs, and when it does occur, we get like this tiny glimpse of our true nature. And it's been there the whole time, which is kind of nice. This little glimpse doesn't last very long. It's not a stable moment, but like all habits, excuse me, it takes time. So, as Hojo says, if we sit still enough, long enough, you know, we can figure out that recognizing our true nature is a very natural thing. And it's available to us at any time, no matter when. Like if we have a terrible day or a terrible year or what we consider to be a really bad moment of Zazen, that true nature is still there. We just can't see it right then. Another thing that happens in our practice, and we learned it long ago, is a sense of freedom that occurs during that glimpse. I think Buddhists, one of the things they call it is beginner's mind. We can see it mostly, or at least I can, with children, young children, when they're learning to do something for the first time, you know, walking or singing or climbing something. My favorite thing to think about is a young child picking up a violin for the first time. Now, I pick a violin because it's kind of a hard instrument. A piano, you know, you press a key, the hammer hits the string, and there you go. And you've got other things to worry about to practice. But with a violin, a young child has to put a finger to find an F on a D string. That's hard enough. But then she has to take a bow and put it on that string and apply the right pressure. And if you've ever heard somebody beginning on violin, it's not quite the most pleasant thing you've ever heard. It's full of screeches and it's just not, it's not your favorite thing. But the thing is, this child honestly doesn't know that it sounds like a bunch of screeches. This child's practice is enthusiastic and genuine, despite, you know, she has no preconceived ideas that it might not be wonderful. So I've rarely had experiences like that in my Zazen, but when they do occur, I'm very happy about it. The ones I remember most were the first couple of years in Zazen. We had our Zendo in a really old house that had been turned into a church. And we'd come in the evening, go up these creaky old stairs, go into the library, take off our shoes, go through the creaky floors. They were all wooden floors, and creak our way into the Zendo. Since it hadn't started yet, the official service, we were asked just to find our Zafu and be kind of quiet because people were getting settled. So we would find our zafu and sit there. I never realized until much later that those 10 minutes or so before Zazen began, that those, I didn't label them as Zazen, I didn't label them as not Zazen, but I just sat, not doing Zazen, and I was just being. So for me, that experience kind of exemplifies, beginner's mind. As adults, as we go through our lives, I think we're just always trying to improve and make things better. That's just the way we are. It's a natural thing, but like screeching on a violin, if we start to notice that we're screeching in our zazen and we try to make it better, it can really start to get into our way. Something, as we've been sitting for a long time, starts to say, you should be doing much better. You shouldn't be doing this. What? You've been sitting for so long. Why do you sound so screechy? And the minute we do that, the wall of practice resistance goes up. So I found something by the guy who talks about beginner's mind, Shunryu Suzuki. He also speaks of a wall, and he said, if you take pride in your attainment or become discouraged because of your idealistic effort, your practice will confine you by a thick wall. And I think that describes it much better than I was able to. So to end, in a recent Dharma talk that I think I heard Sangaku Sensei give, and I hope I get this right. I may have changed it. My memory may have changed it. So if you didn't say this like this, it still helps me. But he said, if you look deeply enough into something, you find out that it's nothing like you thought. So looking deeply into our daily lives and our zazen, we can find that little loose thread, like the ball of yarn. We can find that there's a loose thread, and we kind of gently pull, and we feel the tug of resistance from our practice. But the thing is, I think we can be kind and welcome those feelings that aren't our favorite, because like dogs barking or cats meowing or cement trucks outside, these things, as they bring up resistance in us, if we allow them to relax, we can transform them, and they just become the display of luminosity and clarity that is our true nature. That won't last either. At least for me, it's just occasionally now and then. So when the thread of our resistance tangles again, big mess, we try to relax with everything in our practice and be glad for it. Our resistance will soften. I hope, and I think it does eventually transform this resistance into loving kindness for ourselves and for all beings. I think that's how I kind of make the circle of everything that happens. So anyway, over and over again, we practice, and we just keep practicing and practicing, and we never give up. So thank you. I was just wondering, since this is my own little description of what happens, if any of you found some similarities, or if you have different things that happen or a different way to deal with them. I guess that would be the question.
Yep. So again, Kudo-san has graciously transitioned us into the Q&A session. So she's putting the question out for you for us to have the conversation and the Dharma discussion together. So as usual, if you have a comment, please put yourself off of mute. Raise your hand. Again, Mokyo, I see first, and myself and Kosetsu will try to color the dots and keep everybody in order. So yes, go ahead, Mokyo. Mokyo.
When you were talking, I was thinking of sewing my rakusu, and you really delineated a lot of things that I went through. And you know, I would get comfortable with one thing that we were doing, and I'd get puffed up, and I'd feel pretty good about myself, and I'd be in a rhythm, and then I had to learn something new. And the anxiety that I felt when I had to learn something new was pretty severe. And so we would go, you know, Karen and I would go through it together because I couldn't, you know, she helped me through that. And it dawned on me one day that actually it was, we were in Sangha and we were discussing things, and I'm learning how to do this and I'm learning how to do that. And it dawned on me that people really like to learn new things and how scary it is for me sometimes. And I loved what you said, you know, eventually I had to come to loving kindness for myself. You know, like this is what I go through. You know, this is part of me. And when it comes, it comes. It's not there all the time, but it is part of me. And I have to make it my friend. I have to be okay with it. So thank you very much.
Wow. Yeah, thank you for bringing up anxiety. It's another one of those things in our pocket that we have to bring along and notice so that we aren't taken on a ride by anxiety through our days. There's just a long list of things like that come along. Right.
Yep. Bill Cooper, and Bill, can you say your name for me one time so I can hear
Sure.
it?
Katsu Ryu.
Thank you.
Katsu Ryu. Thank you for your talk, Kuwa-san. To answer your question about do other people have these experiences? Yeah, I really resonated quite a bit with what you were saying, particularly around the need for perseverance in practice and kind of the shortness of periods of fairly clear understanding, and then the rest of the time it's kind of, you know, nose to the grindstone, just practicing, noticing the mind, noticing how easily I can get frustrated, you know, and upset with things not being the way I want them. But yeah, I really felt your talk was very helpful and helping me to be a little more patient with my own practice. Thank you.
Certainly, like Fusatsu said before we signed off last night, she said, now y'all get a really good night's sleep. And I thought to myself, well, that sounds like of course, that's the perfect thing to do. So you can see what's coming next. I told myself, yep, you are going to get a good night's sleep, and I'm going to persevere, and I'm going to get a good night's sleep. And that just set me up for the chances of getting a good night's sleep not to be very good. So that's the thing I'm trying to navigate, is the tightness sometimes in trying to get things to work.
Guess I'll call on myself here in this situation. Kuwa-san, I really appreciate your words. I have noticed for resistance for myself is really key indicators of things that I need to work on. So every time I'm like feeling tight, and I notice it in my body now, that something that I didn't, let me take my breath, something that I didn't used to notice, and just because I've become more aware, is that usually when I'm resistant to something, it's something I need to lean more further into. So I enjoy you really speaking about that process for yourself personally, because I know I experienced that as well. So I noticed, like, you know, again, if I'm resistant to, I think even through some of the talks that we've heard, it's this woven line that's kind of continuing in all of our talks. It's a beautiful thing to kind of watch as we progress along this virtual journey. But again, the perseverance is something that we've heard. You know, the willingness to continue on even through that uncomfortableness. It's not comfortable all the time. So I just am so it was so good to hear you talk about how you worked with, you know, when stuff comes up for you. And Mokyo, hearing her journey with her Rakasu, that's sewing is, yeah, that's, you can see that in sewing all the time. But I really thank you, Kuasan, for sharing that journey with us. That I think that's, we can all resonate with us. So thank you so much.
Oh, certainly. Certainly. You know, sometimes when you have a regular practice schedule, I would ask the main teachers or anybody here, sometimes I'm tempted to give myself shorter times of practice, but more frequent, instead of trying to just muscle through it. Does that seem like a good thing to do, or should I muscle through it trying to be not tight? Do you find any value in short times but more frequent?
Margo, you're raising your hand.
Comment on that if I can. Can you hear me okay?
Mhm.
Very good. Yeah, this is Zenku. And I like the discussion very much, and I think all of us can very much identify, resonate with what you are talking about. You know, I think that, you know, in the beginning when we practice, we think that we're going to be able to calm the mind down, and then it's going to be totally quiet all the time, and it's going to be perfect. You know, this is kind of a maybe something that a new person would think. And what we find out is that the monkey mind never stops, never stops. But what's our relationship to the monkey mind? That's what changes. You know, our flexibility about what's coming up. And again, I like this word, resistance, as you know, but this resistance that we see coming up, this is, how do we deal with that? And in a way, it's kind of baked into the Buddha's teaching on suffering at the core. You know, this is the suffering at a moment-to-moment level that we're dealing with, the angst that we are dealing with. And, but I think our practice is to keep seeing it. The most important thing is to see it and to let go, practice getting better and better at letting go of any suffering that might be related to it. Because in the beginning, we've practiced and we've learned a lot about how to suffer. You know, we're really good at it. And so to undo that, to learn to, when it arises, to be thankful that it has arisen, it's showing us some of this baked in resistance that we still need to let go of. So I think we should take it as, this is a gift. Don't think of it as negative, and just keep letting go of it. Just keep letting go of it. You know, so I think that is very important. I think that, you know, whether you shorten the period or you elongate the period to accommodate how things are going, I think is probably in the long run not that effective. But, you know, I would say experiment with it. See if getting up, walking around, coming back and sitting again might freshen your perspective. This is one of the values of Keen Heen. But ultimately, I think it comes down to just continuing to watch, and no matter what arises, just be determined, have a determination that we're going to take care of it, we're going to let go of it, we're not going to obsess, And so of course it's a practice. You know, I saw a really interesting video of Mel Weitzman the other day. He's 90 years old and he was giving a Dharma talk. And he touched on this point and said that no, monkey mind is always there, but it's our relationship to the monkey mind that that is most important. So that's what I'll contribute.
Yep, I see Hojo Sensei.
And I'm not
Hand
going
up.
to raise hand as
Okay.
well, also.
Okay, yep. So we'll just make our rounds with our senseis.
Well, I thought the question was directed to us. That's why I'm responding. I'd like to respond directly to Kuo-san's question about the shorter interval and more frequent. As you quoted me saying, sit still enough, long enough, you have to decide what's long enough, and you have to decide what's still enough. And as I often say, if there's any doubt in your mind, it's not enough. You can be sure of that. That when it is enough, you will know it. So one of the things that is part of the monkey mind and part of the cultural, societal conditioning that we have is nose to the grindstone, keep at it until the job is done, that kind of thing, right? Don't be a quitter. There's a lot of cultural memes and stuff around that. But what we find in Zen, as I find in art and design and life, the job is never done. You know, it's just, it shifts into another phase of the same old job or the same painting or the same music or the same whatever. So we're never really this anxiety completion, you know, completion anxiety, it's called, that you want to get something complete, done. And so that's one of those things in our pocket that you talked about that we're always carrying with us. So the point I like to make, and I think try to make it very strongly, and just to say that the measurables are not that important. Anything you can measure, like how long you sit, how often you sit, how regularly, how frequently, et cetera, and maybe there's half a dozen or a dozen of those kinds of parameters that we can put around it. They don't matter nearly as much as just don't give up, as Matsuoka Roshi and you said, and as Matsuoka Roshi would often say, just don't give up. So to me, that means it's like interval training. And you shift from one thing to the other, then you shift back, or you shift to something else and back, and so forth. In our seminars that Andrew and I do, we have like we did a writing retreat where we'd sit for half an hour, write for an hour, sit for half an hour, write for an hour. You could sit for 40 minutes, you could sit for an hour and write a half an hour. But in the long term, I don't think it makes any real difference, because what occurs in Zazen, the changes that it affects or brings about, I think, are physiological. They're directly to the nervous system, directly to the glandular system, and directly to the brain, and so forth. And so there's a cumulative effect. So you could say, well, what if I sat 5 minutes out of every hour, 24 hours a day? You know, there would be a cumulative effect. What if I sat every other hour all day long? What if I only sat for an hour every 24 hours? And so forth. You know, how many ways can you slice and dice that up? So I think it's better to sidestep that altogether, because measurables mostly have to do with instructions and orders and goals and deadlines and objectives that we're giving ourselves. And our parents used to give us those, and then our peer group and teachers and so forth. So that's the way we've gotten used to thinking about making effort. But as Dogen said, making effort without aiming at it, sitting without relying on anything, including anything measurable. So ultimately in Zazen, I think you have to jump in both feet, as Matsuoka Roshi said. The metaphor I often use is when you were a kid, you wanted to go with mom in the car. If she said, okay, you can go, and you jump in the car and you're happy, you get to go on the ride with mom. If she said no, you were unhappy, you had to stay home. As we grow up, more and more things are things that we have to do, and fewer things that we get to do. So I think we have to leave Zen in that category, Zazen in particular, in that category of things we get to do. We get to do it when we get to do it. And the only time to do more Zazen is when you're doing Zazen. You can't do it in the past, you can't do it in the future. So I think in the beginning, people need their stricture of, okay, we're going to sit 40 minutes this time. We've been doing 20 minutes, now we're going to do 40. Because the resistance builds, as we all know. The resistance builds to a point where you have this sort of turning point where you get over the hump or not. If the pain is so great, the resistance in your body, we think, Buddha said, you only imagine that your legs are hurting. And we say pretty powerful imagination. But the resistance builds. And so we feel it building, and we get to the point, like the last 10 yards of the 100-yard dash, am I going to get across the line or not, this time? And sometimes we back off. So anyway, maybe you could talk about it in that kind of context, is just to not give up. And as the resistance builds, understand that is the Dharma, that's what is building, and that's what, and we assume it's mostly coming from our own mental, emotional, psychological resistance, but it manifests as pain in the body, pain in the legs, pain in the back. And we have to be physically comfortable. Eventually we get over that hump. Those who haven't gotten over it, we can guarantee you will get to where you can sit comfortably for long periods of time. But you'd have to ask yourself, can I sit for 24 hours straight? Probably not. The resistance is going to build again.
Gasho. And I know we had Sensei Sengaku, and then we'll have John, and then Myosho.
Hello, resistance, my old friend. I've come to sit with you again. I've always thought about Sakyamuni sitting under the Bodhi tree, and Mara coming to visit him frequently. So he sat still enough, quiet enough, long enough that even Mara gave up the resistance of trying to convince him. So when we look at Mara giving up, not resisting, that's quite interesting. Also, the legend is that Sakyamuni reached down and touched the earth for reassurance that this resistance was not permanent. So I think, for me at least, I was thinking about not just interval training that Hojo brought up, but the idea of isometrics, compression and release, and how that is pretty much another rhythm that we are in throughout our day: compression, release, compression, release. And then my final thought, and then I'll get to your question, is when we say dukkha is a wobbly wheel, and we get irritated by the wobbly wheel, let's assume it's a 4-wheel cart. And if the wobbliness is in tune with each of the other 3 wheels, it is harmony. So it is not noticeable as such. So what is noticeable and unnoticeable is, as you were saying that Taishin suggested, is being aware of something brings it on. And our bringing it on means that we then have to deal with it. In sitting Zazen, or in Ango rather, I had 3 Angos. One was I called plain, the second one I called no rain, and the third one I called pain. in the third one, I have rheumatoid arthritis, and I began experiencing excruciating pain, and later on found out I also had cancer. And as I was sitting, as Hojo pointed out, I found myself shifting between Kenheen, and I think Zenku also, between Kenheen and Zazen. And I would sit every 6 hours around the clock. So it's very interesting what one finds. And I think Sakyamuni Buddha said that. Don't believe what I say, experience it for yourself. And experiencing it, if we are aware, is the best teacher. So we can point fingers and we can make recommendations, and then you get in there and you start sewing and you find out that a stitch is more than a stitch. So I think this is a wonderful topic. And when we meet resistance with compassion and loving kindness, we end up in those four immeasurables. 3 greeds, 3 poisons, 4 immeasurables. When we do that, we find that we have loving kindness, joy, metta, and equanimity. And that, I think, essentially is what begins to break. So for me, at least, I find that to be so.
Thank you so much, Sangaku. I can't see you. I can only see a few people, but thank you.
Then I have John, yes? Okay, John, thanks.
Hello. Thank you so much for that talk. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And a couple things you mentioned. You mentioned like the internal dialogue, the monkey mind, the chatter, the busy mind, our habitual tendencies kind of pushing us around. And it just gave me a lot of thoughts, how these things come into play, not only when we're like sitting zazen, but just during our life. There's a tendency with the habitual things that more of the negative will tend to come in our minds than the positive. And that's when we start to feel a lot of the pain and the suffering. As you were talking about this, I started thinking about like things that I've experienced, some of the things that I try to do, and particularly some things that I've read in Norman Fisher's book on training and compassion, which deals a lot with the Tibetan methods of like lojans and mind training, and some particular techniques. And of course, Buddhists are somewhat anti-technique, but it's like all of this takes place in our mind, and our mind is being stimulated by this phenomena that happens outside. So whether we're sitting and then all of a sudden these things start coming up, it's like, oh, there it is again. This same feeling taking place in my busy mind, these same thoughts, and they will reoccur and reoccur. And it happens like to me, whether I'm sitting or whether I'm out doing something. So one of the things that Norman Fisher talked about in his book on training and compassion, and there was like 59 lojans that he talks about in this book. It's like when you have these like bad thoughts or these habitual feelings that come up, is like, all right, just bring it on up. Even like bring it up to the point to where you make it maybe a person or something and talk to it and just say, there you are again. Kind of tired of these feelings. It's time for you to leave. Goodbye. And doing these types of things. And I also started thinking in terms of, and I do that because I will get the same types of feelings over and over again. And so when I'm sitting there and my mind gets that monkey mind or busy feeling, I'll get that sinking feeling in my stomach. And I'm thinking over the situation. It's like, oh, wow, I'm doing this again. And why don't I have more of the good, pleasant things? So I start to like talk to it, try to push it away. An interesting thing too that I was thinking about as you were talking about it was that my Zendo, our priest a couple of years ago was at Tassajara for 3 months. And when he left Tassajara, he went to New York City, and what a change after being at Tassajara for 3 months and then going to New York City. Everywhere he went, he said that he would walk through the city, and as he'd see things that were disturbing, he would just say to himself, metta. And he did this continually, metta. And by the time he was finished, he was feeling like metta all over him. So I guess the thing is that you know, it really resonated with me that the thoughts of like the monkey mind, the busyness, and the tendency that we will pull more of the negative. But like for me, it's like trying to train myself to get out of that type of thing. You know, you can also think about it when you think about like self, original self. You basically come in almost with like a clean slate, and that as time comes along, you become like a conditioned self. And unfortunately, a lot of this conditioning becomes more on the negative side. So it's when these feelings arise, I find that most of them are more negative. So I've just like work at trying to get rid of them. So that was just some of my thoughts. I enjoyed it a lot, and I think the comments coming up are very, very good. In regard to time sitting, you know, it can be little, it can be a lot. I try to practice, like whenever I feel these feelings coming up, I try to remember like, okay, let's try to get rid of these type of feelings. Let's try to return to a peacefulness. If I can't control inside my peaceful mind, the phenomena outside will disturb me no matter what it is. So that's just some of my thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can't hear you.
Amy, did I see your hand come up?
There you go. Is that better? I'm trying to give some space in between people's comments, just a little bit. So you'll see me pausing just a little bit. So I know now, Milsho. She's getting her headset, I think, situated. A little bit of silence and space is a good thing. Since she might have froze. There she is. Okay, Nancy, take your time. We can see if there's any other takers. Yep, Amy, we'll wait. Amy, could you? Thank you.
You want me to wait?
No. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Kuwasan, I appreciate your talk so very much. And the reminder of our body, my body, that the information that my body registers so much information. And what I understood from you talking about your experience was that monkey mind often appears as sort of visuals in the mind, and that resistance can be less visual and can register in the body. And I really identified with that. And I also appreciated the idea that resistance just it's a shapeshifter, and that your example of reading as resistance to sitting on the cushion, and then having cookies as resistance to reading, that you know, reading can be both, you know, the practice and the aversion itself, you know, and it is so interesting. And I wonder if on occasion I go to Zazen as resistance to something else. I don't know. But it's, what a wonderful thing, what a wonderful invitation to be on the lookout for the information about this. And I appreciate it so much.
Thank you. I never thought about that. One thing being aversion, and the other thing, they take turns. I never thought about that.
Miyosho, are you able to come off of mute now, or? There you go.
I don't know, my computer keeps cutting in. It's hardwired now, so I hope it'll do it. I don't know. Topic for me. I spent about 9 years
Miyosho,
I'm supposed to do that.
It's still cutting in and out just a little bit.
Can you hear me? Am I out?
It's like,
I'm hardwired.
Yep, try now.
Okay.
Yep.
Was forcing myself, as part of my recovery. Now I'm not doing that anymore. And yesterday was this games where they're out in the field and the parents are down there screaming, "That kid is one." That's sort of mine telling you to get my attention focused, and this really does this kid part of me lost, like a kid year playing softball the first time, and the thing about it is, if I punish myself for doing that, I'm going to be back at the old place I was. And so it's just kind of leading myself through this thing, pushing at the resistance. Says yesterday in Sensing Ming, where it says that if into being passive, then you're going to have more energy. Say that I've been having a whole lot of experiences. We moved and we're in the middle of chaos. There are workmen here for 2 days. And I went on prayer. And I'm just sitting there with an empty mind, and so it's working off the cushion. It's just not working on the cushion. And this big old rattlesnake went by, and I'm just sitting there in this passivity of just taking it in. So I can't just.
Hey, Miyosho, you're going like, we hear probably like every other word. Yeah, so let me pause.
I might as well just stop.
Yeah, let's do this. So
might as well just stop.
Oh yeah, let me work with you to see if we can get you to your connection, because we're missing every other word, and I don't want to miss the crux of what you're saying.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Sensei Tashin?
Since we're getting into our time for Zazen, I would recommend that we, unless there's any urgent questions,
yep, I was going to stop us
close our discussion. And at the beginning of the next Zazen period, I'll give a bit of instruction, which I think will link in, dovetail in with Kuo-san's talk, and people may find helpful in terms of this spinning mind that people have been discussing.
Yep, and we got like 2 more minutes. Kuo-san, did you have any closing comments? Again, everyone, thank you for your comments. And before we do the closing verse.
Oh, no, I enjoyed hearing all of the comments, and it's good to know that I'm not alone. So
You're definitely not alone. Thank you so much, Kuo-san. So what we'll do is we'll do the closing Dharma verse, and Sensei Tashin will lead us in that. And then we'll go into get set up for our Zazen. Thanks everyone for your interaction and discussion as always.